Chapter 6: Why such massive destruction? The catastrophic events of the seventh seal will result in global destruction, and the death of over 6 billion people. It will be the final 3.5 years of man's self-rule on earth, and it will end with the establishment of God's righteous rule for the next 1,000 years. This perfect world-ruling government of God will be led by Jesus Christ. The 144,000, who have been resurrected to serve as kings and priests in this government, will be ruling with him in the kingdom of God. This great change in world government will not come easily. Naturally, the enormous death and destruction worldwide brings the following questions to mind. Why? Why does God allow this? Why does such a thing have to happen? The answer cannot be given in a few simple sentences. The more you come to understand God's purpose and plan on earth, the more you can begin to understand why. Many will blame God for all that will happen. They will reason that if God is indeed all-powerful, why would he allow such a thing to happen to mankind? Cold and heat prevent all this. Some of this has already been covered in this book, but the greater answer needs to be examined more closely. Then you can begin to more clearly understand God's infinite wisdom in the way he will save mankind. 142. God's purpose for man. If you truly want to understand why God will not prevent the horrifying destruction and death that will soon cover this earth, then you need to stop and ponder why we were placed on this earth in the first place. The specific answers of why this end-time destruction must come to pass will follow in the latter part of this chapter, once the plan of God is explained. Do you know why you exist? Rather than seeking the answer from the one who placed us on this earth, much of mankind chooses to believe that he evolved from slime in the ocean, and that eventually he began to crawl upon the earth. Then, over millions of years, he finally evolved into present-day man. Mankind is so intent on keeping God out of the picture that he eagerly awaits greater evidence that he evolved. Man is determined to distance himself farther and farther from God. Even for those who claim to be religious, the biblical account of Adam and Eve seems too simplistic. Rather than God creating the first two human beings exactly as he said, some prefer to believe that he used some means of evolution to bring about the human race. Even though many religious people find the story of Adam and Eve difficult to believe, they do like the idea that there is some kind of afterlife. Men decently like the idea of finality in death. He prefers to believe that there will be a continuation of life beyond death, but not the kind God has told man about. Ideas of an afterlife among this world's religions are far too numerous to mention. Although mankind does not choose to believe God concerning such matters, he does like the idea of living beyond this temporary physical existence. During the latter half of the past century, God worked through his church to tell the world why man was placed on earth and 143 the purpose of his existence. But the reality and the true witness is that people did not choose to believe what they heard. Instead, they choose to hold on to their own religious ideas and beliefs, which are false. Therein is much of the problem and much of the reason why man's self-rule must come to an end exactly as described in this book. Rather than trying to prove to you in great detail how God's church told the world about God's plan, and how man rejected it, I will simply tell you the facts. However, more about how the church did this is covered in the prophesied end time. God placed man on this earth as part of a very great plan he has for us. But because of his selfish nature, man has chosen not to believe God, and instead, he has chosen to hold on to fables and lies about his existence, as well as his future. Man has responded to God in this way because, as a result of his selfish nature, he refuses to accept responsibility for his own actions. The truth is, we are responsible for our individual actions. We will return to this later, since it is such an important part of the story. God's purpose for man is awesome and exciting, but Satan and religious leaders, who have followed Satan's influence, have deceived mankind into believing foolish distortions of what is really true. When people come to truly understand the truth about God's plan and purpose for them, and come to see that it is truly good news they will come to see that it is far better and greater than they could have ever imagined. As an aside, this good news is what God has been telling man for 6 millennia, but man has consistently rejected it and God has allowed this. In the beginning, the next chapter of this book will be dedicated to the Almighty 140 for God, whom mankind has chosen not to know. Although many religious people throughout the world believe they know the God of Abraham, they do not. Part of the reason why man must suffer to such an extent is because he has rejected the true knowledge of God, in order to continue to hold on to his lies. Man must be humbled mightily, before he will listen to the truth. Here is the truth. In the beginning was God. There was nothing else. Our inferior brains cannot conceive of such a thing. How can man, with such limited mental capacity, understand anything so vastly superior? He cannot. This is much of the problem. Man is so filled with vanity and pride, that he actually believes he can understand such things. Therefore, he rejects what is true, and develops his own ideas about God, which tend to pacify his inability to understand that which he cannot. Man is limited in his mental capacity by the physical world around him. Tremendous technology has burst onto the world in the last century, yet in all this, man is still limited to the physical. God is not physical. He is spirit. He is composed of spirit, and he dwells in a spirit world. His power and might is in his spirit, not in anything physical. God reveals that everything physical is actually sustained by that which is spiritual by him. The universe would not exist without God sustaining it. God created and sustains the physical universe by the power of his spirit, that executes his will. How can a physical human being understand such things? On his own, he cannot. God must reveal to man that which is spiritual. God uses things that are physical to teach about things that are spiritual, since man is limited to the physical universe around him. Jesus Christ gave an example of this. Christ taught that spiritual life can grow and develop in human life, in the mind of mankind. Christ explained that he was the bread of life, and that 145 people would actually have to eat of his flesh and drink of his blood. For many of the Jewish students who had been following him, this was too difficult for them to hear. They had always been taught that God forbids eating human flesh and drinking any kind of blood. Many stopped following him from this moment, because they could only think in literal, physical terms. Jesus was speaking of spiritual symbolism that the church would later observe as part of the annual Passover service. In this service, God's people eat a piece of unleavened bread that represents the physical life, flesh, of Jesus Christ, that he sacrificed for mankind, and the small amount of wine they drink represents his blood that he spilled, when he was killed, for the sins of all. Many who consider themselves to be Christian do not understand this either, even though they think they do. Some take of the symbols of bread and wine, and believe they are doing as Christ taught, but they are wrong, and they are actually disobeying what he explained. They do not understand what Christ was saying, so they soothe their minds with a counterfeit of Passover, that they call communion. There is a way that the human mind can begin receiving true spiritual understanding, but the religions of the world, no, not even traditional Christianity, do not understand such things. Some of this knowledge will be given in the last chapter. When man comes to the point that he will listen to God, and begin to receive true knowledge of him, which is explained in physical terms, then God will begin to share his spirit with mankind, in order to give him the ability to begin seeing him, in truth. Such seeing is spiritual in nature and requires that we be able to receive of God's spirit. When a human being says something that is spiritual, it is not a matter of seeing something through the human eye, it is a matter of seeing in the mind of the spirit. 146. So again, in the beginning was God. There was nothing else. Absolutely nothing. God has eternally existed in his eternal spirit. How can a temporarily living, physically existing, mentally limited human being understand such things? Again, he cannot. God himself must reveal that which is spiritual. Without God, there is no life after death. A physical human being can understand this. After a person dies, we know what happens to the physical body. In time, it decomposes and fragments into the very elements from which it was composed. It returns to the elements, dust, of the earth, just as God said. When a person dies, all life ceases, although some think a spiritual life continues. Men decently like this finality, and he decently like what God tells him concerning life beyond physical death. So he has developed his own concepts of an afterlife. Over the centuries, these ideas have not given man much comfort, but they seem to help soothe the conscience. The truth is, Once man dies there is nothing else. He does not go to heaven, and he does not go to hell. When man is dead, he is totally and completely dead. There is no immortal soul in man. This is a lie, and it is a false teaching of man. Rather than believe what God says,